Breadmaker. What I can say to start off with, bread makers all do the same thing. So there are a few different features on some of them. They're very minor differences. However, in the end, they all do the same thing. And oddly, with all the features all the different bread makers have, I end up making all my bread and all the different styles of bread you can make almost basically on one setting. So don't get too caught up in all the different features and settings of the bread maker. What you want is something that basically can mix up some dough and cook it. So that's the bottom line. Alright, let's start with some basic details. Both of these bread makers are both 2.5 pound loaf makers. So that's the maximum size. Let's start with the bread pans. On the Breville, the Teflon coating, it seems to be a little bit more superior than the Black&Decker. It's very smooth and the bread really comes out nice and easy. The Black&Decker, it seems to have a rougher feel to it. It still works fine, but you know, that's one of the quality issues that I found. It seems to be a little bit better for this Breville compared to the Black&Decker. Let's talk about the configuration in the bread pans themselves. The Breville is a single paddle unit, and the paddle fits down in there. Comes with two different paddles. This one's for making standard dough, and it comes with just a straight standard, you know, for making jams and whatnot. The engineering in this is pretty interesting as far as the paddle goes for the Breville. It's designed so it flips back and forth. Seems really insignificant maybe. Whoa, what good does that do? But when it's in the up position, it will turn, you know, clockwise like this. And it's designed so it always puts a down pressure on the paddle. And then it reverses to mix up the dough and it will flip down, and yet it still has a groove on there which keeps putting pressure down on the paddle. Now, why is that important? Why am I even bringing that up? The reason I bring that up is because the Black&Decker paddles, they just slide straight on like this. And my biggest issue, and actually I replaced my Black&Decker with the newer one here, and the reason I replaced it is because these paddles would often come off in the middle of making my bread. Now, that's not such a big deal. However, the paddle would come off and it would float around in the dough, and it would get involved with the other paddle that was spinning, and it would jam up, and it's actually dented up the pan inside. And in some cases it got jammed up and the motor stopped and just sat there buzzing away, which I think is probably a hazard because electric motors don't like to get jammed up and still try to run. They get very hot, so just imagine there could be some issues with that. On the positive side, I did like the Black&Decker, the layout of the bread pan. It seems to make a little bit nicer of a, you know, a standard size loaf of bread. The Breville is very similar, but it's a little bit wider, so the loaves are a little bit, I guess, less non-traditional looking. However, you know, I'll live with that because it does seem to work fine. The other difference between the two is how the pan goes into the bread maker. With the Black&Decker, it fits in there all right. You have to, it works. It's okay. It's all fine and dandy. But I think the advancement on the Breville one is that it's a one-piece unit, which is circular, and it really fits in there solid. Which, you know, it's hard to explain, but it just seems to make the whole system a lot more stable and a lot more rigid. So basically, just a generalization here, the reason that I replaced this Black&Decker was simply because of that pan and those paddles. They're not designed to stay down and stay locked in place. Whereas the other one, it's been engineered. It seems to work really good. So to me it felt like there was a hazard happening here, where if it got jammed up, well, it gets jammed up, it destroys the finish inside the pan. And if I'm not around, and I don't want to babysit it all the time, it gets jammed up, motor overheats. I mean, we're looking at, you know, maybe it's going to start on fire. I don't know, but all I know is electric motors get really hot when they're not moving and they're humming and buzzing. Now, the other reason I ended up buying this one, which it does cost quite a bit more than a Black&Decker, probably like twice as much. I mean, it looks nice. The Black&Decker, it's white, it gets stained up looking, you know, might not be a big deal to most people. Like, I don't really care either, but I decided if I'm gonna replace it, I'm gonna get something that looks good and looks nice. So hey, little bit of vanity, I bought something that looks nice. Now, the last thing that I'm gonna talk about here is simply this. The controls on the Breadmaker. The Black&Decker is very simple, it's straightforward, but it's not really intuitive. I mean, as I said earlier, once you start making bread and learning the process, you really don't have to change many settings. You don't have to get all fancy. But it's really, although it's simple, it's not intuitive. Now, I'm not going to plug it in and show you. I mean, it's a small or LED display. The Breville is very intuitive. Larger display, it shows everything on there, and you can just basically select things by rotating the knob and, you know, pressing. Yeah, I mean, in that aspect, it's very straightforward and it's a little bit easier to manage. But other than that, I mean, most bread makers, and in my opinion, probably all bread makers, do the same thing. But, I mean, it's a matter of some quality, I guess. So I think the biggest thing were some quality issues with the Black&Decker. The Black&Decker, when it's mixing up the bread, like, bread dough is pretty tough on a machine. It gets pretty rigid in there, and the Black&Decker, you can hear it kind of struggling. I can't explain it, it's a sound, whereas the Breville seems to not have that issue. It just kind of runs and keeps going. And it sounds like it's a little bit, probably a more powerful motor. But I mean, I can't verify that for you, but it sounds like it. So hopefully the longevity will be a little bit better on this other one here, on the newer one. But again, if you're just into making some basic bread, you know, it's not really, don't look at the features and all the fancy things. Just, you want to get a bread maker that works. And I can only speak to these two here. I don't have any experience on the other models. Oh, and the other, I guess the one feature that you might like on the Breville here has a automatic, I guess, a nut dispenser or raisin dispenser, whatever you want to put in there. That's automatic, which if you're not going to be around to babysit the machine, it's kind of nice to have. But other than that, yeah, they both make bread. So there you have it. I'm trying to make videos that just give the basic idea of what you're looking for and what you're gonna get. So I hope it was helpful. Have a great day. Take care. So you're thinking of buying a bread maker. What I can say to start off with, bread makers all do the same thing. So there are a few different features on some of them. They're very minor differences. However, in the end, they all do the same thing. And oddly, with all the features all the different bread makers have, I end up making all my bread and all the different styles of bread you can make almost basically on one setting. So don't get too caught up in all the different features and settings of the bread maker. What you want is something that basically can mix up some dough and cook it. So that's the bottom line. Alright, let's start with some basic details. Both of these bread makers are both 2